So I have the pleasure to call upon Mr. Jyoti Raja to address us.
So good evening, brothers and sisters. So, being a vegetarian, I'm not very old in it. Just 5 years back, I was just like all of you, or like some of you who had been eating meat, and I loved it. But when I came in contact with this spiritual university, they taught us several reasons why one should be a vegetarian. And the reasons were very convincing, and so it was easy for us to give up the habit of meat. So even if we look at the history of humanity, until as recently as 200 years, people were predominantly vegetarian. Even if they did eat meat, it was just on occasions. Only in the last 200 years, the Western civilization, science, has played a predominant role, and so science in particular taught us that meat is good, and so we copied or we followed, thinking that it was good. But now, having gone excessively into this habit of eating meat, we can see that many different diseases are coming, which is getting man to think once again, is he on the right track? So a lot of research, a lot of scientific research has been going on in this field, and they have been studying the mechanisms of the human body. And the more we study, we see that the human body is very closely related to any herbivorous animal. That is, the length of our intestines about 17 feet, very similar to herbivorous animal. In comparison with carnivorous animals, their intestines are only about 3-4 feet long, which means the duration that any food stays in a herbivorous or man's stomach is about 72 hours, whereas in a carnivorous animal it could be only 5 hours. So if we see meat, now all meat are cell products and they putrefy within 5 hours. So what happens when man consumes this meat, which is going to stay for a duration of anything up to 72 hours? It's going to putrefy and release all its chemical toxins. Then the stomach lining assimilates this food, but it does not discriminate the toxin from the food value, which means that we will be assimilating both food value as well as all the toxins. Now the organs like the kidney and the liver, which will have to remove these toxins, were not designed for such function. But now, because we have taken up this new habit of eating meat, now all these organs will have to work extra hard, and they're never capable of totally removing all toxins, which means all toxins are assimilated into our body cells itself. And so, on an average, a meat eater's cell will have about 60% toxin within the cell, which means it is reducing its cell efficiency by that amount. So this is why you find that when you compare a herbivorous animal with a carnivorous animal, you find that a herbivorous animal is able to sustain pressure for a longer period of time because at reduced oxygen level than a carnivorous animal. So also in humans, you find that when one becomes a vegetarian, one has more energy, more endurance than a non-vegetarian. So there was one doctor by the name of Harriet of USA, and he ground a portion of meat and sent it to some very famous lab for analysis. And when the analysis report came, all of them said that this is urine with high toxic level. So he said he couldn't believe it. He sent it to a couple of other labs and all of them came back with the same result. So this made them probe to see why is this meat product registering such high toxin value, just like urine, in fact concentrated urine. So when an animal is slaughtered, they find that all cell activity stops, which means that all waste products that are within the cell cannot be released, and so they are retained within the cell. And so when you grind it, you find that all the toxins that has stopped being released are in that meat. So what we are eating is something poisonous, but yet, because we have developed a taste for it, we know it is bad, but still we consume it. So the first point that one has to know is the reality of what we are eating. If we really knew it was poison, then I guess we wouldn't have eaten it. So science has misguided us to a great extent, but that very same science is revealing the truth once again. So there are many, many reasons if one were to sit and read these new developments that are coming in science, one will be convinced that one has to be a vegetarian. That is why you see that most of the Westerners are becoming vegetarian, while the Easterners are giving up the habit that they always had and copying the West. Well, I guess when they find that it has done them enough damage, then they would change. So that is on the physical aspect. Now, most of us here are on the path of spirituality. So on the path of spirituality, all scriptures, Vedas, many of the ancient scriptures have always recommended a vegetarian diet. But then they never told us why. So this is why we have never followed them strictly. So you find that all meat products not only have all these physical toxins, but when an animal is slaughtered, it is dying in a state of fear, anxiety, anger. All the different negative emotions are also triggered at the time of their death. And so this triggers many different hormones like adrenaline into the system. And so apart from the toxins which are not being evacuated, you find that many different hormones of anxiety are also coming along the wheat, along with the meat that you consume. So all these products will also give us a great deal of anxiety, fear, tension, anger. All these things are also being consumed. So one who is working on a spiritual path is wanting to conquer all these negative emotions. He is wanting to be one who is totally peaceful, who is totally happy, totally calm, and totally in control of himself. So one point that I wish to bring is that I am not this physical being, but I am a soul who is residing and operating through this physical machine. And so whatever I consume is for the body, that is to power this body physically. But along with what I consume, I also take in a lot of vibrations with what I eat. So when an animal is slaughtered, all these vibrations of fear, hate, anxiety, all these vibrations as well come. These don't affect the body so much as the spirit or the soul. So these negative vibrations affect the soul. So it causes within us a feeling of great negativity, of fear, of anxiety. But we have never known this. So this is why you see that the present day society, which is predominantly a meat-eating society, is diseased by many psychosomatic diseases, because they have taken a lot of negativity through the food that they eat. So this is the reason why I need to become a vegetarian. So now, when I recognize that I am a spiritual being, up to now I have been a slave of this body. I have been a slave of my senses. When I come into the path of spirituality, I intend to become the master of myself, no longer the slave of this physical body, no longer the slave of these senses. So you find that one of the senses that pulls us very, very strongly today is the palate, the means by which we are tasting our food. And unfortunately, all good things for the palate are bad for eye, the soul and the body. So the first thing that I need to do is to know what is good for me. So in the Hindu diet, they've always specified that we should eat sattvic food or pure vegetarian food. So you find that food, even if it is vegetarian, need not necessarily be pure, in the sense that if the one who is cooking the food is not having a pure state of mind, then negative vibrations will also be in that food. And so when I consume this, it will affect the state of my mind. So one must understand what pure food is. So there are many different vegetarian vegetables which are also not pure. Like if we take onion and garlic, radish. Now all these have chemical substances which affect the state of the mind. It induces a lot of emotions, especially of sexual origin, and causes anxiety. So many of these things also cause, apart from meat, has an effect on the mental state. So when I want to become spiritual, then naturally I want to have a mental state which is stable, which is not affected by any negativity. So 50-60% of the cause of our imbalance in mental state is because of food. So once I learn to control my palate, then I am in control of one of the senses. Then through the knowledge that we have, we can tell the senses what is good for it and what is not good for it. So thereby I can learn to become a vegetarian. I can learn to take control over the first sense organ, the palate. And once I have gained control of this one sense organ, then I can gain control over all the other sense organs. I can even become a celibate without any problem. So to become a vegetarian, to become a celibate are the two most important things if one is to aspire on the path of spirituality. If one is to identify himself as a metaphysical being, not a physical being, then one needs to gain the conquest of matter. So this body is the first matter that we need to gain conquest over. So once I have brought all my sense organ within my control, then I, the soul, become the master. Which means that I, the soul, has got an intellect which will not be pulled by this matter or any matter for that matter. So which means I have learned to free the intellect of the soul from the gravitational pull of this very earth. Then I, the soul, have been liberated from the bondage of matter. Then I can train the soul to take itself beyond the physical realm, to understand what metaphysics is. So up to now we have always been sensual beings, that we could perceive these worlds only through our physical senses, but we had no knowledge of anything beyond this because we had not developed our metaphysical senses. So as I begin to gain control through all these practices that all religions has always told us, you find that you will have the ability to gain a new sense, the intellect, that is the mind, through which I can perceive and understand many things beyond matter. A world that science do not know, because science know only of physical matter, but anything of metaphysics, science has no knowledge. So I need to become a spiritual scientist. First of all, I have to become soul conscious, for which a vegetarian diet and being a celibate are so important. So then I have opened the vision of my third eye. And once I have this is the greatest gift that any man can possess. And with this, you can transcend beyond the limits of time and space. So even science is limited by time and space. How far can the rockets of man that man built today go? It can't go beyond the reaches of this universe. It can only stay within the material realm. But once I have developed my intellect, then I am not limited by time or space. I can take my thoughts from here to any part of the world in a split of a second. So this is the equipment that we need to develop and train now, if we wish to know the absolute truth. So this is why all the scriptures have always told us to observe this high code of conduct. But somehow they have been not very specific, not very scientific in how they relate this knowledge. So now spirituality is coming in line with science and with the reasoning of science. And so we will be able to explore a new realm of the metaphysics by observing all these principles and gaining the power of our intellect to go beyond matter and to perceive things that we have never up to now been able to. We have always talked about God, but we have never experienced Him in the true sense. But one who has conquered this physical body of matter, of other humans, will be able to transcend and experience what it is like to be with a Supreme Being. And so you will be in contact with truth itself. And so all new areas of experiences will be released to you. So even the pleasures that man has up to now experienced has all been through sensual pleasures, which are momentary and also causing a lot of damage as an end result. But once we are able to go beyond matter, then one can experience joy beyond the senses, which are everlasting, and it does not damage this body either. So when one becomes a vegetarian or celibate, you don't have to feel that you have sacrificed everything on earth. You have sacrificed everything that has given you only sorrow and disease. So what lies beyond this is beautiful. So every human should endeavor towards rising above the limitations of matter and experiencing something that we have long time lost. So science has gone very deep into matter, but it realizes that it's not the end. It is not the path to peace and happiness. So science has realized this, and so it realizes that It is through metaphysical knowledge that one can achieve much. So to become this, then, first of all, you have to have control over this very body that you live in. Which means, in the beginning, there is some amount of sacrifice. When we see the food, oh, it tastes good. But when you see that there is something much more to be gained by this initial sacrifice, you will be able to learn some discipline which will take you so far. So with this I'll conclude, and I hope that everyone tries to see what is beyond matter, not to be limited by matter, that matter can't give us everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jyoti Raja, for your very informative talk. Mr. Raja has actually given a few some of the points which I would just briefly go through for the refreshing of the memory. He states that we must know the reality of what we are eating, because meat, after going inside the body for 5 hours, produce toxins. And also when animals are being killed for the meat, they die with fear, with anxiety, and all these vibrations are in the meat that we eat, and that produces negative emotions. And he said, in order to be master of the self, first we must control the sense of the palate. And he found through experience that vegetarian food is good for him in order to have a stable mental image, so one must control the palate. And one of the senses, and once the food sense is controlled, there is a development of the metaphysical senses, and that will help to understand beyond matter, which at that point he gives something that is very interesting, because once we can go beyond the understanding of matter, then we can achieve the consciousness of being with God, and we can enjoy the joy which is much happier than what our normal senses will reveal to us. This is the point Mr. Jyoti Raja has presented. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will hear the Buddhist view presented by Mr. Fan Seng Lim.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mother Mangalam, and President of Insaf. Well, I have been asked to talk on this subject, and I feel rather difficult because, firstly, Buddhism does not really encourage and say you must be a vegetarian. That is the Theravada tradition. However, there is another tradition in Buddhism which stipulates you should be a vegetarian. See, so I am now in a situation where it's rather difficult for me to say either yes or no. And furthermore, it's complicated more by the fact that recently I have taken up vegetarianism. So you can see that it's not a very easy situation that I'm in. I don't know where I stand actually. However, I shall try to present what the Theravada tradition teaches about vegetarianism. Now, according to the teachings, it says one should not be judged. One should not judge the purity or impurity of man simply by observing what he eats. That's sort of an expression that Buddhism states. Further, in the Ammaganda Sutta, the Buddha said this: neither meat, nor fasting, nor nakedness, no shaven heads, no matted hair, no dirt, no rough skins, no fire worshipping, no all the penances here in this world, no hymns, no oblations, no sacrifice, no feasts of the season will purify the man overcome with doubt. So this means that the Buddha feels that there's more than just food. It is not food or any of these things which directs whether you will be intelligent, whether you will be virtuous, whether your spiritual development will develop or not. It does not depend on all these things. You see, Buddhism as a religion stresses mainly on the mental capabilities, on the mind. And Buddha says everything in this universe starts with the mind. That is a very important statement by the Buddha. So he says, if your mind is pure, you will then do good actions. On the other hand, if your mind is impure, then you are going to end up doing all sorts of evil actions. So whether you eat meat or not does not really matter. This is the Buddhist attitude. You may not agree with it. The previous speaker has given very good reasons why you should not take meat. However, now taking fish or meat by itself does not make a man become impure. A man makes himself impure by bigotry, deceit, envy, self-exaltation, disparagement, and other evil intentions. This is the statement by the Buddha. Through his own evil thoughts and actions, man will himself improve. There is no strict rule in Buddhism that the followers of Buddha should not take fish and meat. That is, according to the Theravada tradition, this is the statement as we see it and what we understand from it. The only advice given by the Buddha is that they should not be involved in killing intentionally, or they should not ask others to kill any living being for them, for food. See? However, those who take vegetable food and abstain from animal flesh are praiseworthy. So you can see that Buddha's attitude is very neutral. He does not think this is a very important decision. So he says, if you want to take vegetable food, he says, they are very praiseworthy. Go ahead, very good. He does not go against it. And another thing I want to emphasize is, Buddhism is a religion which in simplified language is called the middle path. So we don't go to extremes. So in other words, Buddha doesn't say, this is no good, that should be done, this must be done. In fact, if you study Buddhism, you will come to the conclusion that Buddha is very, very liberal. His interpretation of everything is very liberal. And I can give instances. For instance, the precepts which he has introduced, they say, the first precept, for instance, say, I take this precept to avoid from killing all types of animals or living beings. You see, to avoid, he doesn't say you must not kill. He has never said that. So therefore, this is a very important aspect of Buddhism which I like to draw your attention to. So therefore, the Buddhist attitude is very, very liberal. It's a middle path. Though the Buddha did not advocate vegetarianism for the monks, he did advise the monks to avoid taking 10 kinds of meat for their self-respect and protection. They are human meat, elephants, horses, dogs, snakes, lions, tigers, leopards, bears, and hyenas. Now, you see, the reason for that according to his teachings, is that if you want to meditate in the jungle, say by yourself, and you take any of these meats, that the reason is that you smell that meat. That is, if you take dog meat, for instance, you have the dog meat smell. And the animals will come along, tiger comes along, and say, this is a dog, and therefore he eats you up, you see. So, this is the sort of general interpretation. So therefore, if you want to go for meditation, for your own protection, you should not eat it. That is his advice. But if you are staying in the town or something, you don't encounter any wild animals, then it's not that critical. So he doesn't say you must not eat all. It's for your own protection. Some animals attack people when they smell the flesh of their own kind. So this is the explanation given. This is according to the Vg Panicker, which is the rule the Buddha has sort of indicated for all his monks to follow. And therefore, it's a Vinaya rule. Now, when the Buddha was asked to introduce vegetarianism amongst the disciples by Devadatta, that is one of his disciples, who happened to be his close relative, his brother-in-law and cousin as well. And this Devadatta seemed to be a very evil monk. And one of his disciples, Buddha, refused to do so. So the Buddha rejected that. He says, it cannot be done. So therefore, he did not introduce vegetarianism. And he has specifically said, this is not acceptable. He has rejected it. So it's part of the teachings also. As Buddhism is a free religion, his advice was to leave the decision regarding vegetarianism to the individual disciples. So you can see, he did not say you cannot practice vegetarianism. He says it cannot be applied, so therefore he rejected it. But he did say, those of you who wish to be vegetarians, please do so by all means. It clearly shows that the Buddha had not considered this as a very important religious observance. The Buddha did not mention anything about vegetarianism for the Buddhists in his teaching. He did not stipulate anything, so it's very open. Jivaka Kamara Bacha, one of the doctors who used to look after the doctor, he discussed this controversial issue with the Buddha. It's a very controversial issue. And he said, Lord, I have heard that animals are slaughtered on purpose for the recluse Gautama, that is for you, for a recluse Gautama, and that the recluse Gautama knowingly eats the meat killed on purpose for him. Lord, do those who say animals are slaughtered on purpose for the recluse Gautama, and the recluse Gautama knowingly eats the meat killed on purpose for him, do they falsely accuse the Buddha, or do they speak the truth? Are your declarations and supplementary declarations not thus subject to be ridiculed by others in any manner? So you see, the people were very frank. In fact, they criticized the Buddha, you see. So it's open to criticism. Now what was the Buddha's reply? Jivaka, he says, those who say animals are slaughtered on purpose for a recluse Gautama, and the recluse Gautama knowingly eats the meat killed on purpose for him, they do not say according to what I have declared. In other words, they're saying something which I didn't say, did not declare, and they falsely accuse me. That means I did not do that. Jivaka, I have declared that one should not make use of meat if it is seen, heard, or suspected to have been killed on purpose for a monk. This is important because he has stipulated you can eat meat on condition that you know the meat is not slaughtered, that the animal is not slaughtered for the meat, to feed you on purpose. So if you know that, then you are not supposed to eat the meat. So this is stipulation. I allow the monks meat that is quite pure in three respects. If it is not seen, heard, or suspected to have been killed on purpose for a monk. So if it is not seen, not directed, not suspected to have been killed for you, you can eat it. That is his instructions. Now in certain countries, the followers of the Mahayana school of Buddhism are strict vegetarians. While appreciating their observance in the name of Buddha that requires all Buddhists to be vegetarians, we must realize that Buddhism is known as the middle path. It is a liberal religion, and the Buddha's advice was that it was not necessary to go to extremes to practice these teachings. So therefore, those Mahayanas who wish to practice vegetarianism, the Theravadas have no objection at all. They say, go ahead. You be vegetarians, we are quite happy. And generally, the Mahayanas who are true Buddhists also do not criticize the Theravadas for eating meat. I mean, this is the way Buddhism is taught, very liberal. In other words, it is like this, Even the first precept that the Buddha says, avoid killing, you can continue to kill. But the Buddha has said, if you kill, you will suffer the consequences of the killing act. It's as simple as that. So it's up to you to do it. You can still continue to kill. So therefore, Buddhism, to be understood, is a very free religion. On the other hand, if anybody thinks that people cannot have a healthy life without taking fish and meat, it does not necessarily follow that they are correct. Since there are millions of pure vegetarians all over the world who are stronger and healthier than the meat eaters. As mentioned by the first speaker, we fully agree. So Buddhism appreciates that. In other words, we do not disagree with that, what you call scientific analysis. People who criticize Buddhists who eat meat do not understand the Buddhist attitude towards food. A living being needs nourishment. We eat to live. As such, a human being should supply his body with the food it needs to keep him healthy and give him energy to work. However, as a result of increasing wealth, more and more people, especially in developed countries, eat simply to satisfy their palates. If one craves for any such kind of food, or kills to satisfy his greed for meat, this is wrong. But if one eats without greed and without directly being involved in the act of killing, but merely to sustain the physical body, he is practicing self-restraint. These are the views of Buddhism where vegetarianism is concerned. Now, I must explain a little bit more. Is there much time?
Yes, 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, fine. I must explain a bit more to say that the Buddhist attitude is more the moralistic attitude. That is, if you want to develop morally, it is most important that you should be physically strong. Because the Buddha himself practiced all sorts of asceticism before he attained enlightenment. And he nearly died as a result of it. So therefore, he teaches, he says, you people must keep your body in good condition. It is only with a healthy body that your mind can be healthy. Your mind can then function properly. And only then can you train your mind and develop your mind to attain the spiritual purity which you all aim for. So this is the rough idea of the Buddhist attitude towards vegetarianism. Now, on the other aspects about health and others, I leave it to the learned speaker, Dr. Panicker, to do a lot of talking, and the first speaker has already told you a lot about it, so I don't want to talk about it anymore. I must thank you here for listening.
Thank you, Brother Fan Sin Lin. What you heard from Mr. Fan, at least for the meat eaters, you can still carry on eating meat. Now, Mr. Fan says that the Buddhist view for the spiritual development is that spiritual development needs more than just food. He says that everything starts with the mind. Therefore, Buddhism is the middle path. And he emphasized that Buddhism is a very liberal religion. And he gives various illustrations on the individual choice as whether to take meat or to abstain from taking meat. And the final message is, vegetarianism alone does not help a man to cultivate his humane qualities. That's the message Mr. Fan has given, and we can see the great contrast between what Mr. Raja has presented earlier. The next speaker is a very eloquent speaker, and he is Dr. Vg Panicker.
Good evening, listeners. Mr. President Insaf, Mother Mangalam, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. It's a pleasure to accept an invitation from Insaf to be present here this evening. I accepted it spontaneously, but I had reservations subsequently, for I didn't want to be drawn into any controversy or my faith in divinity decried simply because I'm a non-vegetarian. Anyway, we will start on the spiritual because yesterday was Onam, that's our function for the Malayalis, and I had a very good vegetarian meal, and that is in keeping with what Brother Jyotiraj just said, sent me to the clouds, so I'm a bit dizzy upstairs after all the payasam that I ate. There's always a controversy with regard to food. While we come back to food later, let me say what a great God-realized man among the Hindu tradition said. He was the contemporary of Vivekananda, who was called Swami Brahmananda, and he was asked a question. Actually, people who are vegetarians are not vegetarians perhaps by choice. Maybe religion dictated it, not giving any reasons. Perhaps meat and fish and other products were not available. Perhaps the fundamental reason why some members of some religion choose to be vegetarians is because to avoid killing. I think that is the essential precipitate reason. So this Swami was asked a question about this, relating to this, and he answered, this is the way. Nonsense. The Buddhists say harmlessness is the highest virtue. What does this mean? You understand its significance only when you have attained samadhi, which is enlightenment. When you have reached enlightenment and have seen God in all creatures, until then no amount of talk helps us. When you can see the same God in the ant as in yourself, with no difference at all, only then can you practice this virtue. You may talk of not killing any creature, but can you possibly avoid killing? What would you eat? Potatoes? Plant that potato underground. It shoot forth young sprouts. Has the potato no life? Would you eat rice? Plant the paddy grain in earth. It grows into a rice plant. You want to drink water? Examine a drop of water under a microscope and see how many millions of tiny lives are there. You must breathe to live, yet with every breath you kill millions of creatures. Do you see any harm in that? Yet you are surely killing. You think you lose your religion if you eat a little fish? Such arguments against meat diet are foolish. The ancient Hindus held no such ideas. These are later Buddhist, Vaishnavite and Jainistic interpolations. This is as far as the comment, because I can't let this go without making a comment on this. And this comment has been made by a very, very erudite saint, learned. He was what we can call a Jivan Mukti, a man who has attained God consciousness while still living in the mundane world. Now, coming back to nutrition, we must realize that we are like any other beings, whether they are micro or macro. We need fuel to get along, and that's the primary reason why we eat. And we eat what we can get, dictated by personal knowledge, cultural backgrounds, your geographic conditions, your climatic conditions, and many factors. But eat we must, and we eat not because we are hungry. We are hungry because we need the energy, and therefore we eat. All food, whether you eat mutton or chicken, any protein from meat or from vegetable, is converted into energy. Being animals, we fit very closely in our molecular and biochemical structures with animals. All medicines that we doctors use for our patients and for ourselves, of course, are experimented with animals, guinea pigs, and none with plants. Our chemistry is very, very close to animals. Animals are not all carnivorous. Some of the bigger ones, like the elephants, are perhaps herbivorous. The monkeys are. They're good for their acrobatics. They're good gymnasts, world's best monkeys. Elephants are known for their brute strength. So as far as physical attainment is concerned, I would think that the most important consideration is the food that we eat, not what we eat. How we eat is more important. Now, coming to human nutrition. Human nutrition is, in the broad sense, involves much more than traditional concepts derived from studies of nutritional deficiency. Malnutrition can mean overnutrition or undernutrition, or it may be a reflection of certain biochemical alterations at every level of human nutrition. Therefore, it may range from variation in the composition of foods that we eat, alterations in the process of ingestion, digestion, absorption, and ultimate utilization by the body at the molecular level. Heredity and disease can affect human nutrition. Nutritional education is in an essential sense, is for the enhancement and preservation of total health status. Other factors do influence. The world food supply is not evenly distributed for reasons of economics, improvidence, drought, pestilence, ignorance, natural disaster and conflict, environmental pollutions, and overpopulation by a burgeoning population in the world also contribute to some degrees of malnutrition. Nutritional deficiency can markedly impair the intellectual and physical development. Human beings cannot select an adequate diet from a variety of foods by instinctive reliance upon taste or other sense, but require nutritional education. Poor food habits are difficult to change. This should not be kind saying to at a meeting of Insaf. One can change religion more easily than food habits. It's often quoted. There are certain principles, 7 of them, which are important. Animals, including man, adapt to available food. Even as low as 20 to 30 grams of protein per day is enough for the body. Culture determines food behavior. Child learns the way his culture has dealt with food and follows this through life, assisted of course by the mother at home, the teacher at elementary school. Food deprivation does alter behavior. Any form of calorie deprivation affects behavior, whether caused by illness like cancer or famine, or even by sadistic treatment with regard to obesity. Foods complement one another in their nutritional content. This is important with regard to vegetarians because some of the essential fatty acids and amino acids which form the bulk of the proteins are not there uniformly in all vegetarian food. And therefore it is essential that vegetarians should mix proteins. But foods do complement one another in their nutrient content. 2 proteins, each incomplete in essential amino acids, may, when taken together, serve as a complete protein. The incidence of nutritional deficiency increases when the diet has been restricted in variety. Nutrient deficiencies are generally multiple because a diet of natural food rarely will be low in only one essential nutrient. This is important in the therapy and treatment with a single nutrient, in the therapy and treatment of deficiency disorders. The nutrient requirements of human beings are known. While this may seem an overconfident statement, it is a reasonable assumption. There is no foundation for the faddist argument which advocates bizarre foods for managing ill health because it is contended that unknown essential nutrients are supplied through these crude and processed food. These are the general guiding principles of nutrition. I have circulated photostats from textbooks giving you the type of food that we eat. Basically, there are, among the food that we eat, 40 of them are very, very essential. And the essentiality is determined by the species, meaning what species of animal that you are, our individual constitution, and the metabolic circumstances prevailing. If you have this, you will see in it's page 2 here, but 392, it's page 2 here on the list, the essential elements. Now in nutrition, whether you are adopting a vegetarian stance or a non-vegetarian stance, it is very essential that you should see that your food, you can have your choice. I'm not conflicting with the fact that you must eat vegetarian or I'm not taking a stand that you must eat non-vegetarian. Basically, man is an omnivorous animal. That means he needs and he will eat both meat, fish, as well as vegetarian. If you prefer to progress spiritually along the path set for you by different religious orders, and if it is incumbent upon you that you should become a vegetarian, and you have the conviction of that belief, then perhaps you should change, because that would probably be the way in which you will progress spiritually. But I do agree with the Buddhistic view that everything is here in the mind. All thoughts are generated in the mind. Anatomically and physiologically, we have not defined the mind. But we do know that it exists. I do know for a fact that as I stand before you and talking to you, there is a flood of ideas coming through my mind. I am trying to sieve it through my intellect in order that I might make sense to myself and to you. It is important that we should understand the mind, and I think it is the mind that dictates the quality and the quantity if man can be qualified and quantified emotionally and intellectually. This, I think, is very, very important. Sometimes, because of our religious beliefs and convictions, we hop along on theories which are decided upon or pre-decided, and we follow through in life. I think each man in his growth while in this world, wading through joy and grief, going through his disappointments, his success, and sharing his failures, must search out for himself and foray for himself the line of approach that he has to take. So basically, coming back to nutrition, the most important thing, whether you're a vegetarian or non-vegetarian, it matters not, but make sure that you eat an wholesome food. And I have collected for you, which you can take back home and peruse. You will find that in certain areas, vegetarians basically, they don't just live on vegetables, mind you. They do take a lot of carbohydrates and proteins. Those of you who are vegetarians know that there are, in the vegetable meal that you consume, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But they make up for their protein a great deal from the quantity of carbohydrate they eat. But nowadays, we in Malaysia are rice eating, and most of our rice is sort of polished, and therefore we lose a lot of these proteins and fibers. And perhaps we should go back a little into the natural carbohydrate situation. Now, you find that the vegetarian has to make up through eating a lot of butter, cheese, if possible. I don't know whether vegetarians are allowed to eat eggs, but there are certainly some egg vegetarians, and they do get a lot of proteins from eggs. I'm not going to make a very elaborate discussion on nutrition because I don't think you're interested in nutrition. You're interested in so far as that what you must eat must be a proper, well-balanced meal. And for a well-balanced meal, it's just right and brief for me to say that you must have the essential main ingredients, which are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. The elements, they're divided into major, minor, and uncertain, and they have been listed and given on to you. The vitamins are important. They're called vitamins because they're vital amines. One of the most important thing about vitamins is that don't consume it in too much of this with regard to vitamin A, D, and K, because there is definitely hypervitaminosis and toxicity. Vitamin C, everybody talks about vitamin C. It's plenty, is available in fruits, fresh fruits and vegetables. The amount of vitamin C available in vegetables is killed by Indian cooking. We overcook the vegetables. The Chinese do it better. They half cook it. The Western people perhaps never cook it. Now, one must remember that vitamin C is a carbohydrate. We eat a lot of carbohydrates, but vitamin C is a carbohydrate. And it's a vitamin that we cannot prepare within the body, and you must supplement. So when we talk about essential substances, it means substances that must be seen, must be present in diet. The essential amino acids are very, very important, and in certain areas, underdeveloped countries, you find these essential amino acids are lacking. And the essential amino acids are basically 10 in number, and they're listed here for you. Besides this, of course, our food will give us your carbon, the air that we live, the space that we live in, will give you oxygen and nitrogen. The most important thing is that when we consume food, we consume a diet mixture, and that what we obtain from food is energy for growth. It can be physical growth, mental energy. Mental thinking, they say, requires no expenditure of energy, but nevertheless, the organs need food, and therefore energy is needed not only for physical growth, but also for metabolism and certainly our physical activity. The energy allotment is also important, and it depends on the job function that you do, and it varies with age, the size of the person, the sex, and activity. There are, of course, wide variations of individual calorie requirement from people. States of growth, active growth during infancy and childhood, pregnancy and lactation require certainly not only more calories, but more essential nutrients. I've written a whole thesis on this, but I don't think I need to go through that. The most important thing is also the trace elements which I have mentioned there, and the uses and what they are also have been noted down. And these are the pertinent comments that I would like to make on nutrition. There is both, as far as science goes, you can have a wholesome vegetarian food and still grow. You can take a mixed food. When a person says he's a non-vegetarian, is both a vegetarian and a non-vegetarian as well. So food must be taken in relevance to our requirement. It is an essential requirement, and that is the medical viewpoint with regard to nutrition.